So we're delighted to have Libby here today. Libby leads the climate change program at the DEC's Hudson River Estuary program. Her team helps communities adapt to climate change and respond to resilience challenges. Her undergraduate training is at Vassar College, and she has a Master's of Science and an MBA at the Strategic Management and Climate Science and Policy program at Bard College. Libby, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for speaking to us, and the time is yours between now and 9:30.
Great, thank you, Russell. Thank you, Emily. We're so happy to be here. I've been enjoying these talks for about 10 years now. I just want to let my team briefly introduce themselves before I get started. So Lindsay, you want to say hi?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lindsay Cooper. I'm the climate outreach specialist for our team. So I do a lot of the outreach and engagement for our team at the Estuary program.
Hi, my name is Jasenia Loriano. I'm the climate adaptation planning specialist. And I'm working on a lot of climate vulnerability assessments, and yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm gonna share my screen now. So again, I'm Libby Zemaitis. I lead the climate team at the Hudson River Estuary program, and I'm here today to talk about some of the partnership programs we've helped to develop over the past decade to help communities in the Hudson Valley adapt to climate change, and give a case study on one in particular. I'm going to try to share the process and some insights because it's a model that I really believe in and I think could be replicated throughout the region and throughout the state even. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction of our program, and then some of the climate change context and solutions, and then dive into the case study on the Climate Adaptive Design Studio before finishing up with some current resources and programs that are available to communities and partners. So the Estuary program has been around for about 35 years. We help manage this incredibly important, unique ecosystem that is the whole tidal Hudson from New York City to Troy and its watershed. So as many of you, I'm sure already know, it's tidal up till the Troy Dam, which means that we're experiencing sea level rise or river level rise, if you want to call it that, along with the coastal areas. So we have many different teams focusing on many different important aspects of our region, but I'm currently representing the Climate Adaptive Communities benefit. So if you want to check out our new action agenda, we do have a new strategic plan that's going to guide our work till 2025. And that's the link there. Okay, so some of the context of how and why our climate is changing in the Hudson here. I first started about 10 years ago in 2012, and it was right after the big storms, 2 years following, 2011 with Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee, and then Superstorm Sandy just the next year. So that was really the focusing moment where I believe that's when, a lot of state resources and capacity were really starting to increase to try to deal with the issue of flooding and climate risk. But since then, the trend has continued. We've had extreme flooding just this past year. We've had, record heat, a short-term drought. So unfortunately, these extremes are not going away. When we talk about climate change, this always helps me understand, the difference between weather and climate. Weather is what you're wearing today, right now, and climate is what you have in your closet. So climate is the long-term average of weather. So the climate is always changing. It always has been, it always will be. But right now we're in a period where it's changing rapidly. And that's because of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are creating a more insulated atmosphere that leads to more moisture and more extremes. So what does that mean in New York State? New York State takes the global climate models and downscales them for our state and our separate regions to try to understand what our specific risks are. So they've been identified as increasing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and rising sea level in coastal areas. So those are the trends in the climate, and those lead to certain risks or impacts to humans. Those top 3 risks are heat waves, short-term drought, and flooding. So a lot of our work is helping communities deal with flooding and then also sea level rise along the tidal Hudson. So this just gives you a sense of, how things are going to change from more of an economic standpoint, where today's 10-year flood or a 10% flood is a $28 million damage event. And this is a model from Columbia University, so it's not, perfectly accurate, but it gives you a sense of how things could change over time. If you take that storm and you add on 60 inches of sea level rise, which is the high scenario for 2080s, that suddenly becomes a $500 million storm. And our 1% or 100-year storm, which is represents the FEMA floodplain, in the future could become a $1 billion storm or more. So we already have a lot of flooding risk today, but you can see that it's in some ways might change in order of magnitude in the future. So what can humans do to respond to rapid climate change? We need to both mitigate, so reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, which will reduce how bad and how quick climate change is. But we also need to adapt, because at this point we've locked in certain changes, and flooding and sea level rise are the changes that really are going to keep going. The latest IPCC report, International Panel on Climate Change, showed that once we stop emitting, temperatures will pretty much immediately start equalizing and going down. But things like flooding and sea level rise have a longer trajectory that you can't just turn around. So we know we need to adapt to some of these risks. So adaptation is very local, and our program decided to focus on adaptation, one, because many of our partners were already doing mitigation, but two, because it is a very local, personal thing. We can adapt on a community level, business level, residential level, neighborhood level to a large extent. And now we define resilience as the ability to bounce forward and thrive under change. So we used to think about it a little bit more as like going back or keeping things the way they were. But now we want to try to encourage people to accept change and think about new ways of doing things, but also doing things better, especially from standpoints of using natural resources or improving social equity. So speaking of natural resources, we believe nature is the true expression of resilience. Plants, trees, they've evolved for eons to become stronger under stress. So if a hurricane, hits a plant, it might grow deeper and stronger and become more tolerant to wind and rain over time. So how can we design our own systems to mimic nature and use nature, or just, more importantly than all of that, preserve the nature that we have? And in the Hudson Valley, we have a lot of it. We're very fortunate. But before I get too much into that, I do want to caution that we've become more aware of this concept of green gentrification, and improving the environment is absolutely necessary. And it's, what a lot of us focus on, but there can be, side effects of that are unintended, hopefully unintended. So if you improve an area, that can lead to increased property value, and that can lead to displacement of people and what we call gentrification, which has been and continues to be a social equity issue because it affects people in a disproportionate way. So I just like to put that out there because I think it's something we all need to be thinking about. And we have been exploring some of the solutions to that. I'm not going to focus on that in this presentation, but I want to let you know that we want to talk more about that and continue to develop those solutions. So one of the ways we tried to handle that in our new action agenda, our new strategic plan, is to set the goal of all new climate adaptations plans, not only including those natural and nature-based solutions, but also considering things like green gentrification and finding ways to include more people and mitigate those negative impacts. And luckily, we have the support of New York State and the Climate Leadership Act, which is also very focused on those issues. So thinking about, how can we do better in our spheres of influence? I'm just going to share a couple ideas that we've come up with on engagement and policy and how we can improve how we think about nature and social equity. So first, we have the Climate Smart Communities program. It's a certification program in New York State for communities to become climate smart, which means it's a guidebook of a bunch of different mitigation and adaptation actions. And as communities take these actions, they can get certified at gold, silver, bronze levels and be recognized, get grants and technical assistance. So we have a lot of leading climate smart communities here in the Hudson Valley. We're very proud of that. And probably some of you represent those communities today, I'm sure. My team leads the working group that covers the adaptation and resilience actions, which is pledge element 7 in the program. And we updated a bunch of the actions, I think 18 or 19 of them 2 years ago. One of the things we tried to consider is how do we incorporate more natural solutions and how do we incorporate more social justice into these actions and this guidance. So one of the ways that Lindsay Cooper, who introduced herself earlier, our climate outreach specialist, she is working on a new equity working group for the program, and they're creating a new action on inclusive engagement. So we've done a bunch of research on how do we get more voices at the table and in the planning decisions that our communities are making, because it's not easy for everyone to come to an evening meeting. So, and the way that sometimes we design planning processes isn't as accessible to a diversity of people. So I'm just going to share a couple best practices from the literature that we've uncovered. And we do have a web page that summarizes some of this information. So, overarching ideas are committing to listening and learning and being process oriented versus goal oriented. So making sure you're there to hear the community and what their concerns are before diving into what your goal is or what your plan is. Also it's important to build long-term relationships that are making, that you really feel are benefiting the community versus being in and out for like a single project. And then another one is diversifying your partnerships and working with community-based organizations that might, focus on things outside of environmental work. So you could partner with a local housing group or food group or your farmers, all different types of groups that are in every community that aren't always at the table when talking about environmental and climate planning. And then we have a whole bunch of specific strategies for planning meetings. I won't go over all of these today, but there's just a lot of things we can do to make meetings more accessible. When the meetings are, where they are, how can we help people get there, cover child support, pay people for their time, because I think it's important to recognize that local knowledge is just as important as the other expertise and knowledge at the table, and that people should be recognized and maybe even compensated for that. Okay, so those are just a couple teasers before I kind of get into the main meat of this presentation, which is how we're trying to build more adaptive capacity in our communities through a variety of partnership programs. But the one I'm going to focus on today is our Climate Adaptive Design, or CAD program. So we've envisioned this CAD process, which has 3 phases. One is the studio, which is a project with Cornell landscape architect students. And the idea is that helps start a conversation at a community level to start thinking about climate change and how we might need to do things a little bit differently in the future. 2, which is a more recent development, is what we call advancing climate adaptive design, where we've created an RFP that funds design consultants to actually develop those student concepts into a feasible, implementable project on the ground with community support. And then finally, the 3rd phase, which is still a concept at this point, is that the community pursues final design and construction of that adaptation process. So phase 1 is the CAD Climate Adaptive Design Studio. It's led by Professor Josh Serra at Cornell University, and it's a group of 2nd-year landscape architect graduate students. So they're great designers. They've been studying it for years. And every year we bring this studio to a different flood risk community in the Hudson Valley. It's been focused on the tidal Hudson River so far, but again, I believe this is a model that can be replicated and expanded. And there is an annual application for any riverfront community to apply to host the studio. And there's going to be more information on that soon. So there are a lot of different goals and benefits of the studio. Not only are you hopefully inspiring communities and working with, kind of inspirational design and students who are maybe thinking out of the box, we're also advancing research on what these climate solutions are. And we're helping teach the next generation of designers how to consider these ecologically and socially resilient solutions that they'll hopefully then go bring to their careers. And then we're here, the Estuary program is here to help coordinate with the state programs. So linking in climate smart communities and funding and different guidance and policy. And overall, I think our overall goal with this project and all of our projects is to create and promote a culture of adaptation and adaptive thinking. So instead of thinking about one solution or the way we did things in the past, and being open to a variety of outcomes and being able to deal with a variety of scenarios. We're now being hit by all these extremes, ice storms, and then 50-degree weather and heat waves, and then Arctic chills. So how do we become adaptive thinkers that can handle all of those changes? Not to mention things like pandemics and other things as well. So I used to show like 50 slides on the CAD studio. Instead, I'm going to show you this 5-minute video that I think shows it much better. And then I'll get back to my presentation.
Global warming leads to a more rapid change in our climate. We have areas that are dry becoming drier, areas that are wet becoming wetter. Intense precipitation has actually increased 71% in the Northeast. So in a lot of ways, New York is dealing with climate change on a much bigger scale than the national average and even the global average.
Our sea level is rising here in the city, there's no doubt about it. In Hurricane Sandy, we had a 6-7 foot surge here, and every inch that the water is higher is just one more inch that it's going to flood our neighborhood.
Residents and business owners want to know, how do I take care of the next high tide? How do I deal with the next flood?
Climate change is coming to every city, and we have an opportunity to make better choices that work for both now and for later.
In order for communities to become climate resilient, they must adapt. One strategy is to use inspirational, climate adaptive design.
What are you working on?
Doing our markups for the board. We have.
Oh, you're already doing that. That's great. My name is Josh Serra. I'm an assistant professor in landscape architecture, and this is our Cornell Climate Adaptive Design Studio.
The New York DEC has partnered with Cornell University's Landscape Architecture Department to create the Climate Adaptive Design Studio, or CAD. The Estuary program, our program, has annual grants that have a lot to do with flood resilience, green infrastructure, etc. I'm Libby Zemaitis. I'm a partner in the Climate Adaptive Design Studio, and I link in state resources and the communities into the program.
When you engage municipalities directly in a design studio, you really get teaching, research, and community benefits.
The CAD collaboration supports a program called Climate Smart Communities. It's a certification program similar to LEED for buildings, but it shows how dedicated to climate a community is and provides them funding and support.
We finished projects in the city of Hudson, Catskill, and now we're in the city of Kingston.
The design process begins with site visits to the community CAD is partnering with.
You can see where all this sediment is built up.
I work with the students to understand what climate change is. After that, we develop a set of working design concepts, some initial ideas, and then go and meet with people that are in the municipality we're working in. Right now, we'll have a half an hour for the students to introduce their design concept and then have a conversation.
We met with key stakeholders, landowners, business owners, residents, and municipal staff.
So you have to please multiple people while also still trying to be an ecologically responsible designer.
It's really not very pedestrian friendly currently. How did you guys propose to handle that?
A lot of the communities we're working with, they're small, they're very limited in terms of staff and financial resources. So to have a group of students come in and offer really great design assistance, it's really a huge benefit to them.
Bright young kids, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, right?
The students are going to take the feedback incorporate those into their designs when they go back to the studio.
But we got a lot of feedback, and people didn't think what we had would work, and they know the city better than we do, so we've changed our design since then.
From there, we go on to move this towards a much more complete sense of what might be possible. Finally, we finish off with our final stakeholder open house.
Can you tell me about your concept here?
The students present their design alternatives to the community, but that's really where the community process truly begins.
We really hope to inspire communities to change.
And they get back to the original path, and it symbolizes kind of a commitment to change.
We hope that people will take these ideas and develop them further so that their cities can be what they would like them to become.
We talk a lot about building resilience in communities. These Cornell students are really helping illustrate that graphically.
We put a lot of time and effort and work into this.
This was a long studio, but it was fun.
The product that they've put together is something that will be able to be useful for us into the future. So I can't wait to see what goes on next.
To me, the most exciting part of CAD is the fact that we've flipped the conversation around climate change from a negative to a positive.
We're also envisioning that it's going to be something more playful, so people can interact with the water on site. I think this is a great design. I think that solving some of these flooding problems will be really significant.
Getting people to see a vision for the future that brings in economic development, public safety, conserving natural resources. We're wrapping that all in with climate adaptation.
Seeing these visions, seeing these graphic designs, I am feeling inspired.
It's so wonderful to work in the Hudson River Valley. It has such sensitive natural beauty and such character and community, and how we can put that together in a future where climate change is in the mix is really what I think this project is all about.
All right, thank you for listening to that. Thought it would be a nice way to see some of the students and see their perspective, and that was focused on when we were in Kingston several years ago. Now I'm going to do a quick look at City of Poughkeepsie because that's where we were just last fall. So this is part of the waterfront in Poughkeepsie. So here's the Hudson River. We're looking east here, Mid-Hudson Bridge, the walkway over the river. And this is where the river is expected to be today. Here, the yellow area, shaded area, is today's 1% flood, or 100, people call it 100-year flood zone, but that's really a misnomer because the 1% flood has a 1% chance of happening every year, which is compounded over years. So over 30 years, that's actually a 25% chance flood. Not to mention it's only based on historical floods, not future climate and things like that. So you can see a good portion of the waterfront is in this flood zone. And again, that's FEMA regulated flood zone. If you were to buy a house and get a mortgage in that area, you would need to have flood insurance. So in 2017, our state officially adopted sea level rise projections, which include the Hudson River. We're looking at up to 75 inches or more additional sea level rise by the end of this century, which means that these storms will get bigger and more frequent. And now this is actually considered in state funding and permitting decisions. So if you start to add those projections, here I'm going to show you the high projections for each time scenario. Here we have an additional 12 inches of sea level rise, and you start to see these little light blue areas along the coast. Those are areas that would be either inundated all the time or during high tide. So here, 30 inches of sea level rise, which is the high scenario for mid-century for 2050s, you start to see more of this blue area. Going out to 2080s or 54 inches of sea level rise, you see a lot of blue and you start to see darker blue. That means deeper inundation. So the river is kind of taking back some of the shoreline. And then finally, end of the century, the highest 72 inches of sea level rise. You have a lot of blue and a lot of dark blue. So this is the basis of our conversation with riverfront communities is, this change is coming. How do we plan now and prepare for it now and re-envision our shorelines? The waterfront in Poughkeepsie, like many waterfronts all throughout the Hudson Valley, have a lot of different important assets, from businesses, residents, commercial uses, industrial uses, places of worship, community centers. They're really rich, important areas, tributaries. So how do we consider all of that as we think about adaptation and moving and changing our shorelines? Poughkeepsie was an interesting scenario where they do experience frequent flooding, but they don't have as high of a risk today to actual structures. But in the future, that's really going to change. So they have to learn, how to adapt and how to cope with more significant flooding in the future. So what are the strategies? What can you do about it? The students in CAD need to learn about all the things you can do to start to live with that flooding or fight it off, depending on how you want to go. There's kind of three different general solutions. Defense, which is putting hard structures, walls in place to keep water out and to keep yourself dry behind those walls. Then there's adapt or accommodate, which is letting floodwaters in and learning to live with them. And then finally, there's relocate, places that are so risky and flood again and again. Maybe it's better to not have human structures in those areas. So it's important to use a combination of these strategies. And I'll share a couple of examples right now. And it's also important to consider what needs to be in the water. What is it, what uses justify having this really high level of flooding risk? Things like marinas and fishing points and kayak launches, there are plenty of things that need to be on the Hudson. So that should be prioritized. And then there are a whole bunch of things that are nice to be on the river, restaurants, plazas, things like that. And then finally, there are things that don't need to be on the river. So maybe they shouldn't be in that risk zone. Things like parking lots or car washes and whatnot. So one thing we can do is we can make buildings and structures adaptable by elevating and wet floodproofing. So what that means is that you're letting the flood water in and out safely and quickly. So things like elevating utilities, opening up windows and doors. And we have examples of this right in the city of Kingston, where the old Savannah restaurant was actually an old building that was retrofitted to do this. And they were up and running after Hurricane Irene 24 hours later, because they let the water in, let it out, let everything dry out, and then they were operational again. Whereas some of their neighbors never even reopened. And then we have a new construction example of this, the Clearwater Home Port in Kingston, that uses the same principles. And then what I love working with CAD and the landscape architect students is that their expertise is in using natural and nature-based solutions. So they know plants, they know trees, they know all of these great solutions that are a little bit more innovative and cutting edge. Things like green infrastructure and living shorelines, wetlands, and then ecologically enhanced harder structures like revetments and bulkheads. We ensure that this is a community conversation throughout the studio, and we do a lot of work to try to engage stakeholders for their input. We've tried piloting a bunch of different strategies in CAD for the first time. So earlier on, we did something called stakeholder mapping, where we created a table that had different sectors of stakeholders, like public, private, municipal, academic, just all different sectors. And then what's the scale, local, regional, national. And we kind of tried to map everyone out to make sure we were addressing gaps, or at least trying to. We've learned that on the ground engagement is really important. Showing up to the waterfront for a farmer's market, walking around a park, talking to users, things like that is really important. And, it takes a lot of time. We've also tried out things like offering bilingual comment boards and videos and putting them in public spaces. This image here is a Spanish-English comment board that we put in the Ossining Public Library when CAD was in Ossining. In this more pandemic virtual area, we tried a new program called Social Pinpoint, which is an online interactive map and survey that people can access on their phones. And then it's also really important that everyone can see themselves in these designs and in the future. So people of all different backgrounds and abilities, and that these shorelines are designed for all different people and all different uses. So our more recently launched phase 2, which is after the CAD studio, is in the past has been a $125,000 RFP for a design firm, so like a landscape architecture or engineering firm, to partner with one of the CAD communities. And the idea is that, you know, the effort is equally focused on community engagement and development and engineering of an actual implementable design project on the shoreline or near the shoreline. So we completed the first ones in Kingston and Piermont in 2020. And we are just kicking off the second ones in City of Hudson and the town and village of Ossining now. So here you see an image from the design project in Kingston. This was Kingston Point Beach, and looking at kind of terracing and protecting the beach from sea level rise, but also letting it adapt over time. It also included a fishing pier and a wetland cove. And that design actually won a 2021 New York Association of Landscape Architecture Award. So we hope to offer these types of programs in the future. So I'm going to start to wrap up here with some lessons learned. Sharing just a handful of successes I've seen at the community level. This is all anecdotal, but you know, we've been doing this for about a decade now. We really feel, especially in the Hudson Valley, there are just so many leading local governments, and in a state that's dominated by home rule, where local governments have to create their own, you know, laws and plans to go above the state minimum. It's really important. And we're just really happy that so many small communities are willing to take on these big issues. So that, I think, overall is a success. Another success is there's so many partners, and the partners, in my experience, are really willing to collaborate and work together and support communities. So this, you know, groups like Cornell Cooperative Extensions, Sea Grant, Emily and the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, you know, there's just so many people involved, different state agencies that are here to help. And related to that is New York State funding and policy. We do an annual roundup of funding that could be used for climate resilience and adaptation. And it's used typically in the hundreds of millions of dollars just in New York State alone. And now we have policy through Climate Smart Communities and the Climate Leadership Act that also supports this type of work. We've also seen a lot of success of communities updating plans and incorporating resilience into things like comprehensive plans, climate action plans, and doing a lot of planning. Some of the challenges, which are also opportunities at the community level, are, you know, I would say in my experience, the number one is people capacity. Is, you know, we have, 267 local governments. They have small staff. A lot of it is volunteer based, and there's just not enough people to really tackle these issues, do the engagement, apply for the grants. So we need just more people involved. And that's, you know, many of you are already involved in your local community, I bet, or, you know, in a partnership. So as much as we can encourage people and show people the ways to get involved, volunteer on a local board. Some of our partners at Hudson Valley Council for Climate Action, they actually piloted a new program called Local Champions, where they hired climate smart coordinators in small communities that needed help, so that they could work half-time and be paid to work on these issues. And I think that's a great model that could be expanded. Another one is building capacity at county level, where maybe county partners, county staff could help multiple communities at once. Another challenge is engaging residents and a greater diversity of stakeholders. We've tried a bunch of different tactics, and we have a decent idea of, you know, what the strategies are, but at the end of the day, there are bigger structural barriers. You know, not everyone can show up to an evening meeting for a variety of reasons. And then there also may be fear of being part of these processes that could lead to unintended consequences like displacing people. So we're trying to understand that more, and we really hope that, you know, all the partners can work together to mitigate some of these impacts and encourage more people to participate and make it clear that it's worth people's time and hopefully compensate them as well. And then finally, you know, as always, implementing projects on the ground can be challenging. It can be expensive. It takes a long time. Related to that is updating zoning and codes. That's really another thing that leads to change on the ground. We see a lot of communities update their comprehensive plan, but then not necessarily go on to update their zoning or really get flood resilience and other issues into their zoning and codes. So I'll kind of wrap up the CAD section, just saying, I always like to look back at what our riverfronts looked like 100, 150 years ago, because it reminds me how much is going to change this century. And it's really hard to visualize that or really accept that there's going to be change, but there will be, there always has been. So CAD is all about getting ahead of that and really visualizing a future that is hopefully climate resilient and is for everyone. So that CAD really helps people see that future and to start to envision what they do like, what they don't like, how they want to improve their flood risk and other climate risk areas. So again, New York State, home rule state, it's kind of down to each community to a large extent to take the time to see that future and then start building it through projects, zoning, codes, plans. And that's why we're here, is we have a lot of support programs that can help with that, and our partners do as well. So I'm going to just go through a couple now. One, you can apply to host the next CAD studio if you're a riverfront community. We're going to be releasing the details of that very soon. We expect probably in March, and applications will be due around April, more or less. We don't have the exact dates yet, but if you sign up for our newsletter, which I'll provide the link at the end, you will be able to get all those details first thing. And again, I really believe that we can create more student collaborations and studios for all different types of communities and tackling all different types of issues. We also have an annual program with 6 different counties represented by 5 different Cornell cooperative extensions to help complete adaptation actions from the Climate Smart Communities program and to get certified. So visit that website and reach out if you're interested. It doesn't cover every county yet, but we've been expanding over time. And then these are from some of our other teams at the Hudson River Estuary program. Our Watershed team, led by Scott Cuppett, has a few programs for local resiliency. One is improving road stream crossings, so culverts and dams and bridges, to not only pass more water for flooding, but also pass fish and aquatic habitat, connect aquatic habitat, which is also very important. So the steps are, you have to understand what you have, what infrastructure you have, what needs to be upgraded, and then to do the work. So we have in the past funded management plans and replacement designs for this type of work. We also have the Trees for Tribs program, which is improving riparian buffers, planting trees and shrubs along rivers and tributaries and streams. It's open to any landowner to apply twice a year. The next application is due March 1st. Our conservation land use team, led by Laura Heedy, helps communities identify, prioritize, and protect natural resources. The first step a lot of times is to create a natural resource inventory to know what you have. And then that can go on to an open space plan of identifying strategies and priorities, and then finally finding ways to protect that land. One example is the town of New Paltz recently passed the Community Protection Fund, which is a real estate transfer tax that then goes into a fund to actually fund the open space plan and conserve land. So this is very important for resilience. Okay, since I have time, I will show you one more video before we go to Q&A.
People do come together around a challenge, and climate change is a challenge that is drawing a lot of people back into community and getting active.
30 years ago, we never thought we could have cleaned up the Hudson River, but look at what we've accomplished. Today, looking at climate change, I have hope for what we'll be able to accomplish in the next 30 years.
The best vision that I have for the future is that we will, as a society, recognize the value of nature, not just as a scenic landscape or something that makes our world more pleasant, but that we'll actually recognize the value of nature for our quality of life and for the functioning of our entire planet.
Well, the future for climate resilience has to involve meaningful participation from everyone. Low income and communities of color have been historically overburdened by environmental issues. Fresh air, clean water, clean soil, the right to walk down the street and not be viewed as some sort of threat, those shouldn't be luxuries. Those are just rights that everybody should have.
We respect the individuality of each community, and we want to help them create their own visions for the future and realize those visions. So eventually you could kind of tour the Hudson River and see all these different strategies and methods of adapting to climate change, like the beautiful Solaris boat running fully on renewable solar power.
When I was involved with the development of Long Dock Park, we would talk about how we're building this place for the 500-year flood, and people would kind of roll their eyes and laugh. Within 2 years, we had, Hurricane Irene, Superstorm Sandy. So this place has taken a couple of pretty big hits and has survived really, really well.
One of the primary challenges we face as a waterfront community is risks of increased flooding from sea level rise. I would like to see Piermont still be on a map in 2100 and beyond, and that's not a given at this point.
I'm also very interested in the natural communities along the river, the tidal wetlands, and all of the species, and my hope is that they will, alongside us, be able to adapt to these changes.
And I feel like part of the solution is slowing down and just taking that space and time to think about what's really important. And I feel like that kind of a transformation might be where a hopeful future lies.
Right now, we're working on the Climate Smart, becoming a bronze community, and that is exciting. I want the grandchildren to be able to go down to the Hudson River and say, yeah, my grandmother helped save this for us.
The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act is a very bold piece of legislation, taking all of New York State's emissions and reducing them by 85% by 2050.
My hope of the future, the Hudson of the future, is that the treasures of the Hudson is accessible to everyone, regardless of background. The Hudson River has something for everybody.
Climate Smart Communities is a certification program that provides guidance and funding support for local municipalities. Developing a climate adaptation vision is just one step communities can take to adapt to climate change.
We'll get there eventually.
All right, well, thank you so much. Relating to that, the ending of that video, two things that I can leave you with is one, the Climate Smart Communities program is just such a great resource we have. So maybe if you're might be already involved with it, but if not, go check out those adaptation and resilience actions. If you have any ideas for it, let us know, and encourage communities to participate, both municipalities and counties. And then also the Climate Leadership Act, which Alana talks about at the end of the video. The scoping plan, this is a huge act that's going to create many different changes and investments in our state over the next decade or more. So the scoping plan of how to achieve that and what we're going to do is out right now. The draft is out right now for public comment. I'm going to put the link and the information in the chat box for you. I believe there's about 2 more months left, a little bit less than 2 months to continue to comment on that. So please check that out and share your feelings on it and any ideas you have. And then other than that, we have a lot of resources online, our annual funding roundup, a bunch of other mapping videos, tools, examples. And then please sign up for our newsletter. We send out about a bi-monthly newsletter with different case studies and resources. And then we also alert you of opportunities like grants or the CAD studio. And if you have any questions that we don't get to today, you can reach out to me and I will help answer them or direct you to my team, Lindsay and Jasenia, to help however we can. I'm going to put that info in the climate leadership in the chat now, and we can go on to Q&A.
Great, Libby, thank you so much. We're getting lots of words of thanks and appreciation in the chat for your talk and all of the ways that communities can get started with this, which is so important. Got a couple of good questions that have come in. So one of them, do you have any recommendations for best practices in communities that are divided in favor of environmental stewardship, but also denial of certain environmental challenges?
That's a great question. Well, I think I've been surprised at 10 years working on this, how receptive the communities we've worked with have been. We have seen some challenges of this, and we've had conversations, some challenging conversations. And some of the successes I've seen were actually the Rensselaer Plateau Alliance. They have very different stakeholders, people that want to preserve the environment, hunters, community members. And so they started off with a process called, let's come together and talk about our values and what's important to us in the future. I think it was called community value mapping. And it, from what I understand, was a great success. All different people came out and talked about what they wanted in the future. And it turns out, to achieve those results often led to the same, led us to the same solutions. It's not always going to be that easy. But I do think, just starting slow with conversations and trying to find the points of intersection and move beyond talking about environmental protection, climate change, and just talk about, values for you, your kids, the future, what's important to you in this region, how do you use the resources? If you can focus the conversation on that. Again, I don't have a lot of expertise in that area. So I think you could probably check out the Rensselaer Plateau Alliance and maybe reach out to some other partners. I can try to think of some other examples. If anyone else knows of an example, they can put it in the chat for everyone to see too.
Great, thank you. So somebody notes here that water and wastewater infrastructure is such a challenge, particularly along the Hudson River. Do you have any lessons learned to share about the CAD process of how these municipalities are working on wastewater infrastructure adaptation?
Yeah, it's often the kind of 800-pound gorilla in the room is, if the water treatment plan is right there in the floodplain. One thing that's great about CAD is that it's students coming up with just concepts. It's not an official process. It's not going to go in the ground tomorrow. It kind of gives you the opportunity to really think outside the box. So the students are able to propose all different types of ideas that maybe we wouldn't do. We wouldn't think to propose. So we've seen, students can take something like wastewater treatment plants and think about, oh, well, could we move it? Could we elevate it? Are there new models of distributed wastewater that we could think about? And again, these are long-term changes, long-term visions. But we have seen some of the communities after CAD, not entirely, CAD's not taking responsibility for it, but we have seen some communities that have gone on to do engineering analysis of their wastewater treatment plant, specifically looking at sea level rise. Kingston, I believe, actually did most of the upgrades, elevating things. It's not going to be as easy in every community, but our Division of Water did release new asset management plan guidance just this past December that for the first time includes the definition of climate resilience, sea level rise projections, and some thoughts on how to plan for that over time. Because the asset management plan allows you to make those changes over time with regular operation or with regular maintenance, scheduled maintenance. So again, maybe not feasible in every community, but those tools are starting and examples are, starting to emerge.
Great, thank you. We had two questions come in before you sort of answered this question, but I'm going to pitch it to you again, just for if there's any more insight you can share. So two different people have asked about communities that are not along the estuary, that are not subject to sea level rise, communities that are dealing with flooding, historic flooding, but also increasing flooding more inland. And I know that you spoke about some of the opportunities around the culvert assessments and trees for tribs, but I guess I'll just mention that certainly trees for the Climate Smart Communities actions can be done by communities all over, and maybe you can speak to some of the other, more planning options for inland communities as well.
Sure. Yeah. So our team does focus on the whole watershed. CAD has been on the tidal Hudson, but again, I believe that could be replicated in watershed communities. But we have other support programs. Our CCE Resilience Partnership with Cornell Cooperative Extensions, that's an opportunity to get support for adaptation actions and certification from the Climate Smart Communities program. No cost to you, except for some of your time. So that has an annual cycle. So if you're interested, you can visit that website. I'll put it in there and reach out to the county partners. We also just provide annual grants at the Estuary program on various things, but one of the categories is in local stewardship planning is on climate adaptation and resilience, that's open to all watershed communities. Those are typically announced in April and due in June when they are available. So again, something we would announce in our newsletter. So I would love to see, more of these projects in those grants. And then not only do you get funding from us, but my team would be available for some technical assistance as well. And then, the Climate Smart Communities program, there are a bunch of different partners that support that. The Local Champions Project I mentioned, there are going to be climate leadership coordinators that are funded by DEC that it's going to be announced any day now, which are going to be regional coordinators to help communities with those climate smart actions. So that's all I'll name for now. But.
Great, thank you. So lots of opportunities along the Hudson, also along tributaries in the watershed. So great. What an exciting time. We also have a comment here about the polar ice caps melting at increasingly rapid rates, which will lead to massive release of methane from the permafrost. Have the DEC's projections and the information that you're using, has that been factored into the data and the predictions?
So I believe that was factored in for these current projections that came out in 2014, but we do have more understanding and information since then, and they're currently updating. NYSERDA is leading the charge to update all of our projections. It's called ClimateAid, and they're going to have all new projections, I believe, later this year or next year. And I'm very anxious to see what they are and see, have things gone up, gone down, stayed the same. So keep an eye out for that. Another thing we'll announce in the newsletter, but you can also follow NYSERDA on that as well.
Great, thank you. So more to come. We'll look for the announcement for the CAD municipalities. If you're interested in applying for that opportunity, that will be out shortly. New climate projections, new resources and grants. So keep an eye out, get on that email list. And I'll also be sending out links to all of the resources that were shared to all of the attendees of this webinar as well. So you have those links easily accessible to get some more information. All right. Well, having gone through all of the questions, perhaps for the first time ever, thank you so much to Libby Zemaitis for presenting on climate change adaptation and partnerships. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us this morning for our talk. We look forward to seeing you next month, the second Thursday of the month, 8:30 to 9:30 for our March breakfast lecture as well. So have a great day, everyone, and take care.
Have a great day.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Russell. Cheers.